Compared to the black market, there was little incentive to work in the fields or even to hold a government job. Kampuchea had nothing produced for export, so gold was used as the only way to pay for the goods that came from the border. This was gold that families had hidden during the war and the term of Pol Pot's rule.
The military operation to overthrow Pol Pot was completed in 2 weeks, but the famine that followed lasted for 2 years. Why was that?
The food situation, yes. I would like to say that Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, we have been torn by war for 30 years. So if the European countries, they have passed through 5 years of world war, and Vietnam and the war in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia is have much more bombs than twice the number of bombs in World War II. If the European countries, they need 5 years to rebuild up their countries, we need at least 30 years, if not more, because more bombs than in everywhere in the history.
But there was an immediate crisis.
Yeah.
And the...
Media?
An immediate. It was a very immediate crisis. Life and death. It turned out to be death for a lot of people in 1979. Why didn't the Socialist Bloc respond more quickly?
We think if we have not responded to them, they could not survive. Because in 79, it was near starvation.
It was real starvation.
Yes, real starvation, because the regime of Pol Pot since 75. It is enslavation. And the socialist country, they have done their best. If there is no such aid from the socialist country and from the other countries in the world, from Western Europe, from the United States and from your country and so on, they could not overcome these difficulties.
There is no question that for a certain period of time the Vietnamese army is going to be necessary in Kampuchea in order to stop a Pol Pot takeover. If they withdrew now, the Heng Samrin regime would collapse. But I think the question of Vietnamese total withdrawal from Kampuchea simply does not arise. If you study Vietnamese history for the last 700 years in Kampuchea, the manner of conquest has always been to move people forward and follow up with the army. This time it's the other way around, that the army has come, conquered Kampuchea, occupied Kampuchea, and it is entirely logical to presume that the Vietnamese will end up with a real colonialism, a real occupation, a Vietnamese presence throughout all of Indochina, living and working as citizens of Indochina, so to speak, but ethnic Vietnamese.
The approach of Heng Samrin is really very miserable, because Heng Samrin is a puppet regime. Cambodia is losing her personality as an independent state. Now the Vietnamese, they are trying to impose on Cambodia their way of life, their Vietnamese and Soviet style communism and so on. The Cambodian people cannot be happy about it. And more there are Vietnamese settlers from Vietnam. Our people becomes slaves of Moscow and of Hanoi. The fate of Cambodia will be the same than the fate of South Vietnam. That was South Cambodia. What is the meaning of Angkor now? No significance, because we are now no more an independent state.
As an army of occupation, the Vietnamese were remarkably liberal of movement and Buddhist worship, as well as black marketeering. They were at pains to disguise their communism from any reminder of Pol Pot's rule. But that was bound to change. Once the famine receded, the outside world lost interest. But the Vietnamese stayed on. And the longer they stayed, the more they bred resentment. They imposed conscription and forced labour. And now there were new political prisoners, secret arrests and torture. Inevitably, this all added fuel as the war of resistance mounted.
Amnesty claims both Campuchian and Vietnamese personnel have imprisoned and tortured thousands of political opponents. And the Vietnamese-backed government in Phnom Penh have been battling resistance forces in Cambodia since Vietnam overthrew the infamous Khmer Rouge.
The Vietnamese, they are very expansionist. They are very imperialist, very colonialist. The situation, according to the Vietnamese, in Cambodia is irreversible. That means that they are determined to stay in Cambodia. So they are not ready to soften their attitude. On the contrary, they want to remain very tough.
In 1982, Sihanouk made his first return visit to Cambodian soil since the fall of Pol Pot.
We want peace, but peace without freedom, without liberty, without independence has no significance for us, is unacceptable. Reason why we will not give up fighting. We will go on fighting against the Vietnamese invaders till the day they accept to settle peacefully and in a friendly fashion the issue, the Cambodian issue, the so-called problem of Cambodia.
More than 3 years before, he'd retired in despair, vowing never to play any part in politics again. But now, in a tour of the border camps, Sihanouk announced his commitment to join a united front of resistance against the foreign control of his country. In this new coalition, Sihanouk had joined for a second time with Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge. Also included was another faction led by Son Sann. These were the Free Khmers, who'd been welded together as the Khmer People's National Liberation Front, the KPNLF. In earlier days, Son Sann had served as a prime minister under Sihanouk, and before that as a personal tutor when Sihanouk was a young king. But now they were divided, and their rift was only papered over for the sake of the coalition. We still have a long way to go, my sons, Sihanouk says. But the United Nations as a world organization and many independent countries support us. So the Vietnamese are alone and very isolated, says Sihanouk.
I made all efforts to persuade the Vietnamese to deal with me, to settle peacefully our differences. But I did not succeed. Now it is too late to have Sihanouk with the Vietnamese. I'm not accustomed to play a double game. A double game, no. But having failed in my attempts to settle the problem, our dispute directly with Hanoi, now I decide once for all to be in the coalition. I will not resign.
For many Cambodians, Sihanouk's return was an omen. He was still revered as the living God King. As they pressed forward to touch him in person, they called out his old title, Father King. Others were incredulous. How could Sihanouk join in a new coalition with Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge?
Yes, the horrors of the Khmer Rouge are well known. I have You know, 5 children of mine, 14 grandchildren of mine were killed by the Khmer Rouge. In my